You know, usually when we talk about achieving a goal or like seeing a project through to the end, there is this underlying expectation of a dashboard.
Oh, absolutely. We need a progress bar.
Right. We want metrics. We want immediate visual feedback that tells us we are actually moving forward. You click a button on your phone, a package arrives the next day.
Or you send a text and you get those little typing bubbles instantly.
Yes, exactly. We are deeply conditioned to expect absolute visible control over our timelines.
The modern world basically runs on that illusion of control.
Yeah.
We build our environments to be highly predictable and heavily optimized. I mean, the baseline assumption is that an input must immediately equal a measurable output. If you put the work in, you should see the needle move right away.
But then you step into the world of a gardener, and suddenly that entire dashboard just goes completely blank.
It really does.
The progress bar disappears. We're looking at a landscape of time and effort that is, honestly, entirely out of our hands. So, welcome to today's deep dive. Our source material for this analysis is a singular, seemingly simple journal entry. It was published on June 27th, 2026, by a writer named Ang.
It is a delightfully brief piece of writing, just a few paragraphs long, really, tucked into a much larger body of work.
Yeah, it's titled The Bloom of the Patient Crown of Thorns, and it is actually part 938 of a series called Notes on Gardening.
Which is a huge number of entries.
Right. And if you were just skimming this, you might think it's a quick, mundane update about a houseplant, specifically a crown of thorns or Euphorbia milii. But as we dug into this text, we realized the short post offers this really profound, unexpected masterclass.
It really is.
It is a deep exploration of patience, the illusion of human control, and just the rare wisdom of knowing when to simply let things be.
It's one of those texts where the brevity actually forces you to look much closer at the spaces between the words. I mean, Ang is writing about the life cycle of a plant, sure, but they are simultaneously writing about a philosophy of living. One that challenges almost every default setting we have in our hyper-connected, hyper-optimized modern lives.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I want to start with the timeline of this project.
Yeah, let's do it.
So Ang tells us that they began propagating these Euphorbia milii cuttings, and they use this wonderful poetic phrase to describe the start date. They say, many moons ago.
Many moons ago. I love that.
Not, 6 weeks ago or on March 14th, many moons. And now finally the cuttings have bloomed. But Ang explicitly notes that the growth of this specific plant is, in their words, rather slow.
Which is a massive understatement in gardener speak.
Right.
What Ang is actually describing is a period of extended botanical stasis. Like, let's look at what is physically happening here. For those who aren't green thumbs, propagating isn't just planting a seed in the dirt.
Okay, so what is it exactly?
Well, you are taking a severed piece of an existing plant, like a stem or a leaf, and you're basically coercing it into cloning itself.
Okay.
You are forcing it to build an entirely new life support system, a totally new root structure from absolute scratch.
Which sounds incredibly traumatic for the plant, biologically speaking.
Oh, it is a massive expenditure of energy. The plant is in pure survival mode. So when Ang says the growth is rather slow, it's because all the frantic activity is happening below the soil.
I see.
The plant isn't putting out pretty green leaves or flowers because it's desperately engineering the subterranean foundation it needs just to stay alive.
Wow. And, I am the kind of person who gets visibly frustrated when a web page takes longer than 3 seconds to load.
Oh, same here.
Or watching a pot boil. It drives me absolutely crazy. We live in a world obsessed with instant results. Like, if an app doesn't work immediately, we delete it. If a life hack doesn't revolutionize our morning routine by Tuesday, we abandon it entirely.
We just move on to the next thing.
Exactly. So why is it that a gardener like Ang finds this rather slow growth, stretching over many moons, to be so rewarding? Like, what is the psychology behind embracing a timeline where nothing visible is actually happening?
What's fascinating here is the complete surrender of the human timeline. Think about the phrase Ang chose, many moons. By measuring time in lunar cycles rather than days or weeks, Ang is intentionally shifting the baseline from a human calendar, which, is driven by deadlines and fiscal quarters and productivity sprints, to a natural cycle.
It's a completely different scale.
Exactly. When you expect instant gratification, your brain is relying on quick spikes of dopamine. You click the button, you get the spike. But those spikes are incredibly shallow. They fade almost as fast as they arrive, which leaves you constantly hunting for the next quick hit.
It's like you're just pulling the lever on a slot machine over and over again.
That is exactly it. But when you invest time, many moons of time, you engage a completely different neurological pathway. You are building this deep, deep well of anticipation. You're watering a cutting. You're checking the ambient temperature, watching for the tiniest microscopic change in a stem. You are actively nurturing your own capacity for delayed gratification. So when you stretch out the timeline like that, the slow pace isn't a flaw in the system. It actually becomes a feature of the experience.
Okay, so if you are waiting many moons for this tiny cutting to build its underground life support system, you would naturally assume the gardener is out there every single day, just fussing over it, tweaking the soil, aggressively managing the process to make sure it doesn't fail.
Right, that would be the modern instinct.
But when you look at Eng's actual method, it's the exact opposite.
It really is a masterclass in restraint.
So Eng writes that they moved the cuttings to a microclimate with full sunlight exposure, which sounds very deliberate, right?
Calculated.
But then in the very next breath, Eng confesses something that genuinely stopped me in my tracks. They write, "However, I cannot recall whether I fertilized these plants."
It's an incredibly revealing detail.
See, here's where it gets really interesting, because I have to play devil's advocate here. I read that and immediately felt a sense of contradiction.
Okay, how so?
Well, how can someone dedicate many moons to propagating a slow-growing plant, carefully relocate it to a highly specific microclimate for optimal sunlight, and yet completely forget if they fed it? To me, forgetting to fertilize a plant you've spent months nurturing doesn't sound like profound wisdom. It sounds like bad, neglectful gardening. I mean, why are we praising someone for forgetting the plant food?
Oh, well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, this is arguably the most insightful moment in the entire journal entry because it highlights the supreme power of environment over intervention.
Environment over intervention. Okay.
Yeah. Think about the definition of a microclimate. It's a localized zone where the temperature, the humidity, and the light differ from the surrounding area. Eng didn't just put the plant on a random windowsill.
No.
They engineered the macro conditions perfectly by finding that specific full sunlight microclimate.
So they set the stage.
Exactly. They built the foundation. And once the foundation was right, the micromanagement became irrelevant. We love to intervene in modern life.
We really do.
We love to micromanage, to add supplements, to constantly tweak the inputs. In gardening, chemical fertilizer is the ultimate human intervention. It's a shortcut. It's us basically saying, I don't trust the soil to do its job, so I am going to inject synthetic nutrients to speed up the timeline.
We want to be the hero of the story. We want to be able to say, my proprietary blend of nitrogen and phosphorus is what made this flower bloom. We want the credit.
Oh, we absolutely want the credit. But Eng's memory lapse proves they totally surrendered that ego.
Wow, yeah.
The sunlight is doing the heavy lifting, not the human. And Eng actually reflects on this realization by recalling their youth. They mentioned that when they were planting this exact flowering species back in their younger days, they didn't fertilize them at all.
Really? None at all?
None. They just let them grow on their own, noting that the Euphorbia milii is perfectly capable of thriving in the, quote, tropical wild with little to no maintenance.
The tropical wild. I mean, that phrase alone paints such a vivid, chaotic picture. It implies a fiercely independent ecosystem where plants don't have human caretakers meticulously measuring out drops of liquid plant food every Sunday morning.
No, definitely not.
They survive on a sheer adaptation.
And by remembering the tropical wild, Eng is validating the biology of plant stress and resilience. Plants in the wild develop robust root systems precisely because nutrients aren't handed to them on a silver platter. They have to work for it.
Right.
If you constantly flood a plant with synthetic fertilizer, you can actually weaken its natural resilience. It becomes completely dependent on the intervention.
You know, it's a bit like helicopter parenting versus setting up a safe playground. Like if you hover over a kid and catch them every single time they stumble, they never learn how to balance on their own. They never build the core muscles.
That's a great way to put it.
So Eng is basically setting up the perfect playground, that sunlight microclimate, and then just stepping back to let the plant figure out its own balance.
That is the perfect mechanical analogy for what is happening under the soil. Eng is trusting the resilience of the organism. It's a really profound lesson in doing the hard, upfront work of setting up the right environment and then having the discipline to just get out of the way.
Which brings us to the results of all this disciplined waiting, because I'm sure a lot of people might be listening to this and thinking, okay, a slow-growing plant that takes forever and that I'm supposed to ignore just sounds like a really frustrating, unrewarding hobby.
Right, where is the payoff?
Exactly. What is the actual payoff for all this hands-off parenting?
The payoff is entirely structural.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Well, Ang notes a very specific, highly preferable trait about the crown of thorns once it finally achieves its goal. Despite the agonizingly slow growth, when it does produce a flower, those blooms last significantly longer than most other plant species.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The ultimate reward for the slow wait is endurance.
So the plant is basically built to last.
Exactly. There is a vital biological symmetry to that endurance. Fast growth in the natural world almost always results in fragility. Think about a common weed in your yard.
Oh, yeah, they pop up overnight.
Right. It can shoot up 6 inches in a single weekend, seemingly out of nowhere. But because it grew so fast, its cellular structure is incredibly weak. You can pull it apart with 2 fingers, and it will just wither in the sun in under an hour.
Because it prioritizes speed over stability.
Exactly. But slow growth prioritizes density. It's much like human muscle fiber.
Oh, interesting.
Yet if someone inflates their muscles quickly using steroids, they look massive very fast. But those muscles are structurally compromised. They're highly prone to tearing under actual stress. But if someone builds that muscle over years of slow, deliberate resistance training, it becomes dense and practically indestructible. The Euphorbia milii is spending many moons building incredibly dense botanical muscle. It gathers its energy drop by drop, so when it finally spends that energy on a flower, it creates a structure that is biologically designed to last.
That makes so much sense. The time wasn't wasted at all. It was just being stored as durability.
Exactly.
But this actually leads to the climax of the journal entry and the part that genuinely puzzled me at first.
Right.
So Ang has achieved absolute success. The cuttings survived the trauma of propagation. It rooted, it thrived in the hands-off microclimate, and it produced these incredibly dense, long-lasting blooms.
A total victory.
Right. So Ang asks themselves a logical question. Would I propagate this species further? And their answer is just brutally blunt, just 2 words. Not really.
Not really. It's the ultimate anticlimax, but in the best possible way.
So what does this all mean? Because it defies almost every modern instinct we have about scaling success. If I figure out a workflow that saves me 2 hours a week, I immediately try to apply it to my entire life.
Naturally, yeah.
If a company launches a successful product, they immediately try to build an entire cinematic universe around it. If you figure out the exact secret to coaxing a stubborn, difficult plant to bloom beautifully, shouldn't human nature dictate that you fill an entire greenhouse with them?
That is the instinct of a culture trapped on the hedonic treadmill.
The hedonic treadmill. Let's define that for a second for the audience.
Sure. A psychological concept that observes our tendency to quickly return to a relatively stable level of happiness despite major positive or negative events.
Okay.
In the context of achievement, it means that the moment we reach a goal, our baseline expectations immediately shift upward.
Oh, so one success is no longer enough.
Right. It just becomes the new starting line. We constantly desire more, which keeps us perpetually running on a treadmill, chasing a finish line that is constantly moving away from us.
So if Ang were on the treadmill, the moment this one plant bloomed, they would immediately think, I need 10 more just like it to feel this good again.
Precisely. We are totally conditioned to believe that we must endlessly scale our successes until they eventually become burdens. But Ang's conclusion is a radical rejection of the hedonic treadmill.
Yeah.
Ang decides to just keep the single plant exactly as it is, declaring it a plant-and-forget species that they will occasionally revisit. By refusing to scale, Ang is actively choosing appreciation over endless labor.
They are just stepping off the treadmill and actually admiring the view.
They are recognizing the concept of enough. I mean, if Ang were to immediately take a dozen more cuttings and start the many moons process all over again, they would instantly transition from being an observer of beauty back into being a manager of a production line.
Back to the grind.
Exactly. They would be back on the clock, worrying about microclimates and root systems all over again. By accepting it as a plant-and-forget species, Ang is allowing themselves to actually enjoy the final steady state of the project without turning it into a factory.
It's the profound difference between, planting a small garden because you just want a quiet place to sit versus planting a garden so you can take photos of it, sell the seeds, launch a startup based on the seeds, and suddenly you are working an 80-hour week and you absolutely resent the dirt.
And we see that everywhere today. The complete monetization of every waking moment. The pressure to turn every hobby into a side hustle and every minor victory into an empire.
It's exhausting.
It really is. But there is immense psychological value in just letting things be. Not every blooming plant needs to be multiplied. The crown of thorns is doing its biological job by simply existing in the sunlight, holding onto its long-lasting, hard-earned blooms. And Ang is doing their job by simply walking by, occasionally revisiting it, and feeling a quiet, uncomplicated satisfaction.
Occasionally revisiting it. I love that. It completely takes the pressure off the relationship between the creator and the creation. You don't have to stare at it every single day for it to have immense value. It's just there in the background, reliably beautiful because of the dense foundation it built.
It creates a real sense of peace in your environment. When we constantly intervene, we constantly propagate and scale up our ambitions, we create a very noisy internal life.
Yeah, that's true.
It's an ecosystem of constant demands. Feed me, optimize me, track my metrics. Ang's plant and forget philosophy just turns down the volume of modern life. It creates a quiet space where you can actually hear yourself think and where you can genuinely appreciate the things that have already bloomed rather than always looking for the next seed to plant.
Wow. This whole deep dive really upends how we typically view productivity and success. It is genuinely amazing how much dense wisdom is packed into such a brief journal entry. So, to bring this all together for you, we've extracted some incredible, actionable takeaways from Ang's gardening notes today.
We really covered a lot of ground.
We did. First, we explored the quiet neurological power of waiting many moons. We saw how embracing a slow timeline and stepping away from instant dopamine hits doesn't mean you're failing. It means you are building dense biological muscle for a much richer, longer-lasting reward.
And we also uncovered the realization that establishing the right macro environment often dramatically outperforms constant anxious intervention.
Right.
Putting the plant in the microclimate with full sunlight was the necessary foundation. Obsessing over whether or not to add chemical fertilizer was just noise. Trusting in the resilience of the tropical wild within our own projects can really save us from the sheer exhaustion of micromanaging every single variable.
And finally, we found deep satisfaction in the plant and forget mentality, the radical choice to step off the hedonic treadmill and actively decide not to scale up a success. To look at a hard-won, long-lasting bloom and confidently say, "This is enough. I will just revisit this occasionally and appreciate it." It's a vital reminder that we are allowed to let things be.
It really is.
But before we sign off today, I want to leave you with one final thought to ponder, something that really struck me when analyzing the source material. We mentioned at the very beginning that Ang titled this journal entry Part 938.
That number still blows my mind.
Right. Think about the sheer weight of that number, 938 entries. This isn't someone who writes for instant viral fame or massive scale. This is someone who shows up consistently over time, quietly documenting the slow-growing reality of their environment.
Yeah.
So, if a simple, slow-growing plant and forget flower can inspire a writer to sit down and pen Part 938 of a journal, what seemingly low maintenance, everyday things in your own life are quietly blooming in the background. What is sitting in your own personal microclimate right now, having built an incredibly dense foundation, just waiting for you to occasionally revisit and appreciate it exactly as it is?
That is a very powerful question to carry forward.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep looking for those background blooms.